Spotlight is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It seeks to spotlight people, places, and events from around the Diocese of Youngstown that promote the new gospel of joy called for by Pope Francis. Your program host is Father James Korda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Korda. During this series, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. And joining me in today's show is Msgr. Jim Kolp. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And I think before the taping, you had mentioned that this is really one of your first times here in the studios at CTNY.
It is.
We welcome you in a special way today.
Yes, and you do a very fine job. It's very
you.
Interesting.
Thank you. We're pleased to do it, and thank you for sharing our ministry with us.
You're welcome.
You know, I think the folks that are with us would like to get to know you a little bit more. So if you could share some of that with those folks, and also in relationship to what we're celebrating this year, the 75th anniversary, and how you recall past anniversaries of the diocese.
Okay, I'd be happy to, Father. Actually, I went into the seminary. I went to St. Paul's grade school in North Canton, then to St. John High School in Canton, hitchhiked for 4 years from North Canton to Canton with my brother, and we had 2 English boys who lived with us at that time. And so then in my senior year, around March of that year, I was invited to, actually I had gone up to see my cousin who was secretary to Bishop McFadden for some years, and told him that I was interested in being a priest. And so he helped me along. And then in March, I was invited to go to Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. And so I did that, and I started out at Sacred Heart Seminary in March of the year 1943. And, you know, things went along regularly, and within 2 months, we got word that something was happening, that there was something happening. A new diocese was being formed. And of course, you know, Canton, actually one of the main streets in Canton is Cleveland Avenue, so our direction was always in Cleveland. We weren't exactly sure where Youngstown was, or very much about it. So it was very exciting, and there were a number of young men from our 6-county area who were studying at that time. And so then the diocese began, and Bishop McFadden, of course, was chosen as the first bishop. And when he came to the diocese, it was sort of interesting, he came by train. And the train would go to a town in our diocese. It would stop, and he would get out, and there would be many, many people from that city in that area greeting him. I remember being in Warren when the train stopped there, and there were just lots and lots of people there. And so Bishop McFadden was our first bishop, and so he had Monsignor Prokop. Father Prokop was his secretary. Father Heinrich was his chancellor. And so the diocese began with, you know, just a lot of excitement and a lot of interest by a lot of people.
Tell us what you remember most about Bishop McFadden. Was there anything that stood out in your recollections of him as a young man? Yes,
well, I knew a bit about Bishop McFadden for many years because I had a cousin who was a priest. His name was Vincent Belmont, and he was secretary to Bishop McFadden for some years. And so I knew about him, and of course, from the very beginning, we realized he was a very, very wonderful person, communicated very well with people and with the priests, and was very interested in doing all he could to make our 6-county area a very special place. And he chose St. Columba in downtown Youngstown as the cathedral. And so, as I say, he used to do some writing. For example, some years into the diocese, he decided that we should have a book called The March of the Eucharist, which was a description of all the parishes in the diocese and the various others in it. And So that was very, very interesting. I was just looking at mine recently, and it has a lot of interesting history in it.
It does. It's interesting because as we celebrate anniversaries here in the diocese, you obviously recall the 25th and the 50th and now our 75th. What comes to mind often is that maybe we should publish again another March of the Eucharist, because if you look at that book, there are a number of parishes that are here in the Diocese of Youngstown that are not in the March of the Eucharist because they were not established at that time. So wouldn't it be wonderful to kind of recreate something like that for future generations, especially as we look toward our 100th anniversary?
Yes, I think that would be a very fine idea.
I'd like to, in our last few minutes of our first segment, talk about another book, and that is the book that I believe you wrote on Lyndon Smith. Tell us about him and briefly about the book.
Okay, Father Eli Washington John Lindesmith. And I suppose one reason I was interested in him because he baptized my grandfather in New Berlin, which is now North Canton, Ohio. It was called New Berlin until the First World War. And so Father Lindesmith was a man who his family lived right close to Lisbon in Columbiana County. His father was Protestant and his mother was Catholic. So they decided we'll raise the boys Protestant and the girls Catholic. And so it turns out that his father passed away very young. And then he began to go to the Catholic Church and eventually decided to go to the seminary. He was the first American-born young man who was ordained for the Diocese of Cleveland. And he was pastor in parishes in the Diocese of Cleveland, including St. John's, Canton, Ohio, that's where he also served New Berlin or North Canton when my grandfather was just a youngster. And so then he was sent to Latonia as pastor. And when he was in Latonia, the Bishop of Cleveland invited him to become a bishop or to be a priest in the Indian Wars. This was around 1880. So he left the diocese, went to Montana to become a chaplain in the Indian Wars. He met many Indian chiefs. He took very good care of the military that he was responsible for, and he wrote down everything so that when I was writing this book, I just had to follow his many, many writings. Most of them are at Catholic University in Washington because he left a lot of the material there. But a very fascinating person.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit more about your experience in the Diocese of Youngstown, but we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
So please stay with us. We'll be right back. The first Catholic parish established in Portage County in 1831 near Randolph-Suffield was St. Joseph Church. Years later, John Newman, who would become the first American male to be canonized, was sent there to give a mission to help heal the divisions that occurred between the German Catholics who had settled there. Perhaps that is what made him a saint. The parish is also noted for its school, which dates back to 1832, being the oldest English-speaking school west of the Alleghenies. The church is also famous for its Lourdes Shrine, which has welcomed pilgrims since 1927 and is the only exact replica of the world-famous grotto at Lourdes in France. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. After the Catholics of Warren stopped meeting in their homes and organized a structured parish, they used a former Episcopalian church for their worship. St. Mary's Mission was established in 1837. Yet the first resident pastor did not come to the parish until 1868. Other parishes quickly grew up in Trumbull County, including St. Stephen Niles in 1853, St. Patrick Hubbard in 1869, St. Vincent de Paul Vienna in 1871, now called St. Thomas the Apostle, and St. Rose Gerard in 1892. The other 15 parishes in the county were established after the turn of the 20th century. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with Monsignor Jim Kolp, and we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. Monsignor Jim, if you could tell us a little bit about one of your first assignments, which I believe was St. Columba Cathedral. There's a rich history with St. Columba. Tell us what you remember about that.
Yes, I was ordained, as you mentioned, in 1950 and assigned to St. Columba Cathedral. And so I came here, and I was, you're a little concerned, what's a cathedral going to be like and how you're going to be there. But it was just a wonderful place to be. Father Msgr Joseph Trainer was the pastor, and the associates were Father Jim Malone, but later Bishop Malone, Father Thomas Kelly, and myself. And the people were, in Youngstown, the people seemed to have such a great love of priests that you just felt at home wherever you went. And so I was there for 7 wonderful years. And I do have to say that one of the events that happened was not a fortunate one. Back in 1854, I had heard confessions for First Friday, and on a Thursday evening, and then I went over to the cathedral, and I was speaking with a young man over there, and all at once there was a pound on the door. I went to the door, and the church is on fire. Well, so immediately, of course, I went to the telephone, called the fire department, and then we realized that there had been a thunderstorm, a violent thunderstorm, which had struck the roof of the cathedral, which had a lot of wood in it. And so we looked, and sure enough, the church was, the fire had quite a start. So what we did, also Father Bill Picard was an associate with me. So what we did immediately, we went to the altar to take out the Blessed Sacrament, and you could just hear the crackling in the roof. And so we took the Blessed Sacrament out, and we went over to the where the Sisters of St. Paul had their apartments there near their bookstore. We rapped on the door. I think they were all safely, in bed by that time, but they came to the door, and we told them what had happened. So we put the Blessed Sacrament in their tabernacle. And then we went back to the cathedral to try to take out vestments and various things like that from the sacristy that could be salvaged at that time. And so I remember standing there in the parking lot across the street with Bishop Walsh, looking at the fire. And I remember I said to the Bishop, I did not finish my divine office yet today. And he said, don't worry about that. And so, as I say, regretfully, the church did burn very, very much. And Father Trainer, at that time, used to go out to near Lake Milton, Lipke Road, where he had a little place out there, and he was out there at that time. So I drove out the next morning to tell him about the fire. I didn't tell him how serious it was. I just said the church, And so we came into town, and then, of course, we saw the cathedral, what had happened to it. And so, as I say, that was one of those things that happens, and it did happen.
Sure. Well, thanks to you and the Daughters of St. Paul for saving our Lord in the Eucharist, first of all. But second of all, what was some of the reactions of people around the diocese seeing their cathedral, their beautiful cathedral, destroyed by fire?
Yes, I think everybody was very, very shocked, and they were very concerned about it and willing to help in any way that they could. Thankfully, it was insured, so that helped a lot. In fact, the insurance came to $940,000, but the damage was even more serious than that. Sure. One thing that happened, the church had 2 beautiful towers, St. Columba Church, and what they did, they really weren't able to salvage or to save the towers or any part of the church. So they took large cables, and they took the one tower and swung it back and forth so that it landed right in the body of the church. And then the other tower, which was closer to the rectory, they'd put a large cable around that and swayed it back and forth, hoping it would land in the body of the church. But instead of that, it turned the other way and went through the cathedral rectory, which was where, of course, all of us were living, but no one was in the house at that time. But that meant we all had to find a place to live for a while. And so that was something that happened. And then something rather interesting too, when the new cathedral was built, it had a beautiful tower, and it was going to have a nice crucifix, a nice cross at the very top of the tower. So it was on a Sunday afternoon that the cross was to be placed there by helicopter. And so people all around were watching this helicopter with the cable. You know, it was going to drop the cross into the place where it was to contain it, and then to remove the cable and go away. But what happened was the helicopter dropped the cross somehow into the place where it was to be, but it was sort of crooked, so that they could not release the cable from the cross. So there the helicopter was, there was the cable fastened to the cross in the cathedral. So we all prayed very hard, and thankfully they finally were able to release the cable so that the helicopter could go away.
Well, in our last 2 minutes of our middle segment now, where then did the diocese have its cathedral during the...
Yes, during the time after the fire. Well, what we first did, the first Sunday, we moved into the armory on Rayan Avenue. So, we had of course, the altar, and then sometimes you'd be there at Mass, and all at once you'd hear a click for somebody. Somebody had gotten at one of the vending machines in another part of the armory. But we had Mass there for a short time, and then we moved into what was really our garage of the Catholic Action Center. We had a large garage there, so we were able to make that into a presentable place so that we could have Mass there for quite a while.
Okay, interesting. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We know also that St. Pat's on the south side of Youngstown was named a co-cathedral during some of the renovation and the building of St. Columba. We'll talk a little bit more about that in our third segment. So thank you for sharing that wonderful information.
You're welcome.
We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
In 1850, a Catholic mission was established in Conneaut, making it the first organized Catholic presence in Ashtabula County.
It wouldn't be until 1864 that an actual building was purchased to serve St. Mary Church. 8 years before the construction of St. Mary's Parish Church, St. Joseph Church in the city of Ashtabula was established. Parishes in Conneaut have aligned under the title of Corpus Christi Parish, and in the city of Ashtabula as Our Lady of Peace Parish. There are 11 other parishes in that county that serve over 20,000 Catholics.
Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. In 1847, the parish of St. Columba was established. It would eventually become the Cathedral Church when the diocese was formed in 1943.
It was the first parish in the city of Youngstown and in all Mahoning County. The first church built in 1851 was to be on land in Briar Hill that was donated by David Todd, who became the first and so far only governor from Mahoning County. A second church was built in 1864, and in 1897, the third church was erected on the site of the present cathedral. A tragic fire destroyed the cathedral in 1954, but by 1958, a new cathedral was dedicated, which serves Catholics today.
Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future.
33 million Americans have descended into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.
Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with Monsignor Jim Kolp, and before we took a break, you were telling us about some of the tragic things that happened to our cathedral with the fire and then subsequent rebuilding of that. I know that you had mentioned that Father Jim Malone was stationed with you at St. Columba Cathedral, who subsequently became the third ordinary of the Diocese of Youngstown and really our first auxiliary bishop. Tell us a little bit about your experience of Bishop Malone or Father Malone at the time.
Okay, be happy to, sure. Actually, we were in the seminary together for 1 year because we both were at St. Mary's Seminary in Cleveland, and of course when the diocese began and so on. And then he was sent to the cathedral as an associate there, and he was noted for his convert instructions and for his homilies and things like that. Well then, in 1950, I was assigned to the cathedral, so we were assistants together. And so we did things together. For example, after Christmas, we would usually go to New York for a few days. We'd have Mass at St. Patrick's. In those days, of course, we each had our own Mass, because we did not have concelebration. And then a friend of his was stationed, Father Al Raymond was stationed down in Guatemala. So he invited me to go with him down to Guatemala. So we did that. That was a very interesting experience to go down through Mexico to Guatemala. And then we went also on the way back through Haiti and back. So he was, after being an associate for several years, he was appointed as superintendent of schools, and he continued his education as much as he could at Catholic University and did receive a doctor's degree from Catholic University at that time. And then, as time went on, he was appointed as an auxiliary to Bishop Walsh. And so that was a very thrilling thing for us to see a person from here being one of our own bishops. And so he just was an outstanding bishop for 27 years. I was a pastor at St. Mary's in Massillon for 27 years. So that name 27 rings a bell with me because he was a bishop here for 27 years. And besides being a bishop of our diocese, the 6-county area, he also was involved in the Conference of Catholic Bishops in Washington. He had various positions in it, and then he became the vice president of the conference, and then he became president. And so, here's a boy from Youngstown, Ohio, who was really the president of all the bishops of the United States. I thought that was rather special. And for example, I was reading an article recently from the New York Times, which described him at the time that he was chosen as the president, and they said they considered him a very remarkable person. So, as I say, those were very wonderful years, and I have a lot of happy memories of him and his family, and the time that we spent together and all that he did for our diocese.
It's interesting, as you were talking, many things came to my mind, and the Diocese of Youngstown has really been blessed over these 75 years. Also, as we look to our future, of a lot of firsts that happened. You had mentioned Bishop Malone becoming the president of the conference. He was really the first bishop to be elected to lead the conference. Normally it was afforded to archbishops or cardinals, and just many other things. And I think his involvement in the conference also encouraged other priests and religious and leaders in our diocese to be involved on the national level. And how important it is for us to kind of look at our church as universal, as global, is bigger than just us. And as we celebrate our anniversary in your long experience with the diocese and also as a priest, what are some of the things that you remember and that you celebrate as a priest that gives glory to God, but also understands the bigger picture of what we're all about.
Well, in 1964, of course, up until 1964, we had, Mass quite a bit in Latin and so on and so forth. And then the Vatican Council took place. And so Bishop Malone was already a bishop, so he attended both sessions of the Vatican Council. And not only did he attend them, but he also, when he returned, he had what he called council review days, in which the priests and lay people from the diocese were invited to the cathedral for about 8 months, studying the various documents of the council. And it was just a very interesting experience. We had speakers from all over the country, and of course it was very ecumenical. I remember I was stationed in Msgr at the time, and we had a very fine ministerial association in the Sharon Msgr area, and we had I think a rabbi came with us and a Episcopal minister, so it was just a very wonderful ecumenical program. So I think Bishop Malone was responsible for much of the wonderful things that happened.
In our last few minutes of our time together, tell us about your 27 years at St. Mary's in Massillon. I actually was ordained in 1979 and stationed at St. Joseph Church in Canton. So I knew you were there at St. Mary's. And what was it about the community that you, to this day, continue to love?
Yes. My predecessor was Msgr Labby, and he was well loved. And when he retired, he remained right with me at the rectory. So he stayed there. In fact, he more or less died in my arms because I took him up to the hospital. He had a breathing problem. And so in a sense, he sort of died in my arms. But it was so, you might say, so easy to go in there as pastor because they had such a wonderful pastor and a wonderful priest there. And so I suppose one of the outstanding things that I remember was when we decided to build a new hall, which would be, of course, for the school as well as the parish, and it was called the Msgr Labby Center after him, and it was to cost $1.2 million. And I tell people, the United States bought Alaska from Russia for $1.1 million. Oh, we paid it $1.2 million for our Msgr Labby Center. But as I say, I was there 27 years, and it was just an outstanding place to be.
Well, Monsignor Jim Kolp, thank you for sharing your wonderful history with us, and also for the wonderful things you've done in your many years as a priest, serving this diocese and serving the good Lord. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Spotlight has been a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Korda.